You're watching The Art of Scumming, and today we've got another one of our End Times lore videos, this time covering Prince Tyrion of Ulthuan. So what happens to Tyrion during the End Times? Well, before we get into that, I want to say that if you want to recreate that experience using Total War Warhammer 3, it's relatively easy to do. If we go over to Tyrion here that is currently ripping through Bretonnia. If you want to recreate the End Times for Tyrion, it's very simple. Instead of going down the Majesty of Ulthuan line here that gives you a whole bunch of faction buffs and race buffs for the High Elves, you go down the Bloodline of Venarian, which gives you a whole bunch of combat prowess as well as tanks your friendship capabilities. After you've accomplished that, you go to the north of Ulthuan and you pick up the Sword of Cain and you never let go of it. And the reason it's that way, we'll get to here in just a second, but if you want to see me play through a campaign that is set up that way, then get me up to 5,000 subscribers by early July, and we'll schedule a live stream series, because it will absolutely take a series where we do that exact very thing. That said, jumping into the questions first, is the start position of Lothorn thematic to the End Times for Tyrion? And I would say, no, not really. Tyrion is known as the Dragon of Kothik, which is this region up here. And that leads me to believe that he is from Kothik, although I cannot find any origin information on where he was born or raised or any of that sort of information. I can only assume that being named the Dragon of Kothik means that he was born in Kothik. However, as far as Total War Warhammer 2 and 3 are concerned, I think from a gameplay perspective, putting him at Lothorn is a good decision for a couple reasons. First and foremost, I think that he is supposed to be the premier legendary lord for the High Elves. He's the most basic and most user-friendly of all the lords. So putting him at Lothorn with a cushy four-settlement province that's very wealthy, tucked into a region of Ulthuan that's really defensible, makes a whole lot of sense. Secondly, if we look at the position of all the other legendary lords on the Holy Donut, if you will, we have Tyrion down here, we have Elariel up here, and we have Eltharion over here. If you put any more legendary lords on the Holy Donut, you're going to end up with a pretty cramped position. And so much so that the CA has made the decision to not put a Lithanar, for instance, in Nagaryth, which is, I think, his most thematic position. You would also, if you were playing in the End Times, want to have Caldor filled with Imric. You would want to have Teclis somewhere here on the Holy Donut as well, and then that's just a really crowded situation. So I think that moving them all over the map adds some variety, and that's a good thing. So I don't ding them too bad for putting him here at Lothorn. That said, what happens to Tyrion? Well, to understand that, we have to understand what's going on with Malekith, actually. So there's a event that happens several thousand years before the End Times occurs, called the Sundering, and the elves all kind of split up. We have the Azrae, the Wood Elves, kind of do their own thing and ignore this whole thing, but we have a separation between the Druki, which are the Dark Elves, and the Asur, which are the High Elves. Genetically, all three of these elf races are genetically compatible with each other. They are just simply different tribes living and doing things differently. They can interbreed and all that sort of stuff, which will be pertinent if we do a video on Malekith. So if we look at Malekith's position that I do not have uncovered as far as the Shroud is concerned, it's up here in Nagarond, and he's having some problems with not only his mother Marathi, but he's also having some incursions from Chaos, the northern tribes, Scarbrand, and Valkia at the same time. So he decides that it's just a really bad situation up in here, and it's time to finally retake Ulthuan. So he comes all the way down this way, and he makes his incursion onto Ulthuan at the Eagle Gate. This is where the first major battle of the invasion of Ulthuan occurs, and they struggle bus it for a little bit here, but Malekith ends up throwing basically his entire force at the Eagle Gate and basically crushes it. And the purpose for this is to gain access to the interior of Ulthuan. There's a lot of economic centers in here. Not least of all is Illyrian, which is immediately taken over by Malekith. And then he makes his way over to Lothorn, which is the economic hub of Ulthuan. So that's kind of how that happens. You can see there's some strategic goals there for them. In addition to the physical barriers of all the gates located in the passes and the high mountains, there is a strategic barrier here in the form of the Anars of Nagaryth. The Anars are kind of a splinter faction and nobody really gets along with them. Tyrion's faction doesn't get along with them. Malekith's faction doesn't get along with them. Everybody wants to stay out of the region of Naggareth. And you can even see that if you... I think this is well done. If you look here in Naggareth, all of these positions for Tyrion are considered uninhabitable wasteland climate, which is fantastic. A very cool Easter egg that they've worked into the game. You cannot very easily occupy this territory because it's occupied by the Anars. Now, the Shrine of Cain shouldn't probably be included in the region of Naggareth. I feel like it should be its own thing, kind of like one of the gates is, and Tor Anlek and Tor Dranil should be the only regions in Naggareth, but that's beside the point. So let's talk about the other legendary lords that are present on the continent of Ulthuan. Well, you've got Imric is supposed to be here. Teclis is supposed to be here. Tyrion's here. Eltharion is not. Eltharion is actually killed shortly before the end times kind of kicks off in Ulthuan over here in Sylvania, and we'll have to do a separate video on how that whole thing goes down, if that's something that you guys want to see. The only other legendary lord that we have is Elariel is also present on the continent of Ulthuan. On the Dark Lords, or the Dark Elf side, we have all the characters, basically, for the Dark Elves are present during the invasion of Ulthuan. If we look at what's going on with Tyrion around this time, as far as background is concerned, there's currently a chaos incursion going on in northern Ulthuan, and Tyrion's son is actually killed in that, so he's got some emotional problems there. And then his female child, which is actually not publicly his, it's supposed to be the daughter of Elariel and Finubar, the Phoenix King. Tyrion's got this weird kind of like loyalty thing going on with the Phoenix King, but he's also banging his wife, and he definitely had a child with her. And that daughter is actually recently killed in the events over here in Sylvania. And if you want a separate video for that, then we'll have to do that another time. But Tyrion's got some emotional problems going on right now. He's also has a feud going on with Imric at the time, so that's sort of another aside. There's a lot of problems in Ulthuan at this time. Malekith decides to start knocking on Tyrion's door, and he's basically like, you know what? The world's going to shit. This whole thing is going to blow up, and if the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket, then I might as well go down fighting, which I respect big time. He doesn't just roll over and take it. He's going to go down fighting. The only problem with that is that to go down fighting, he has decided that it is in the world's best interest for him to take the Sword of Cain. And if you wanted to put the Sword of Cain into a real-world context, it would be like every nuclear weapon that was ever produced by man was located inside of a sword. Yeah, some bad stuff. It also has some other... So you can almost think of it like a dirty bomb, I suppose. So everywhere that it goes, it sheds corruption and all that sort of stuff. So it's a pretty bad thing. You don't use the Sword of Cain under any circumstances. Tyrion's like, you know what? Fuck it. So in doing so, he has alienated a substantial proportion of Ulthuan. He still has a pretty strong support system across this region of Ulthuan. Again, forgetting about the Anars, but over here he has Imric in open rebellion against him. Imric joins with Malekith, and from taking the Sword of Cain, he alienates his brother Teclis. Teclis has some ulterior motives for doing this, but he ends up supporting Malekith as well. So you've basically got a lineup of Tyrion against the world at this point in time. Malekith has all of the Druki Lords, Teclis, and Imric. At the beginning of the whole thing, Elariel's kind of a free agent, you would say, and actually... Eltharion's dead, so he's not around to help. So you can consider this region over here, by default, owned by Malekith. So he owns the economic center, he owns one of the means of weapons production, he owns the horse region, Yeah. But Tyrion, having taken the Sword of Cain, has some serious power going on here. And he ends up retreating into the interior of Ulthuan, and this is kind of where the battle line is drawn, so to speak. And Malekith ends up coming out smelling like roses because he had an opportunity to take the Sword of Cain and did not. So everybody's kind of declaring for him. And then what we end up with is a battle that takes place somewhere up around in this region. It's not clearly defined, but the battle is between Tyrion's forces, Imric's forces, and he's actually supported also by Orion. So Orion shows up through the World Roots system over in this region. And that's probably why there's a World Roots system here in the Gaian Vale for the Wood Elf campaign. But that's beside the point. Just a little Easter egg there. And Imric is seriously injured during that battle and is evacuated, and Orion is killed. So if you're not familiar, Orion's supposed to be a demigod. He's supposed to be semi-immortal, but with the power of the Sword of Cain, Tyrion prevails. Ultimately, this turns into a long, protracted guerrilla warfare type battle style between Malekith's forces and Tyrion's forces, in which point Ilariel actually declares for Malekith, and they come up with a plan to bring Tyrion to decisive open battle, and they do that at the Isle of the Dead. And this is a place that is steeped in lore that we won't get into. Teclis is doing some wizardy crap that was actually part of his ulterior motive all along. And then Imric, having healed up, is to do a diversionary type thing with his dragons. And then Malekith is to battle Tyrion directly. They end up getting in a one-on-one conflict in which both of them get pretty beat up. And actually, Tyrion bests Malekith. But in the process of this whole thing, Elithanar shows up and tries to kill them both. He shoots both of them with one of his magical arrow bolts from his badass bow, and both of them go down. However, the thing about Malekith is he is actually not exactly corporeal 100%. He is known as the Witch King, and he's got some life-sustaining stuff going on as far as magic is concerned. While he is gravely wounded during that battle, he is able to sustain himself long enough for Ilariel to ultimately heal him. Tyrion, on the other hand, is dead. So Tyrion dies in a final battle at the hands of Elithanar, actually. Over the course of that battle, Malekith draws on some of the power of the Vortex, destabilizes it, and Ulthuan sinks. Tyrion is no more, and that is basically where his story ends. If you want to see more about this, then please sound off in the comment section down below, and maybe we'll do a dedicated video on what happens after that whole thing, maybe following in a little bit closer detail what happens with Malekith. Thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see another video here at the Art of Safe Scumming.